to Disambiguation. I'm your host, Michael Fawcett. Each week, we interview experts in AI, generative AI, and business automation to help business leaders understand how to use these tools for the biggest business impact. In our show today, we look at generative AI for retail. This is the second episode in a series, AI for Industry Verticals. More to come on that early next year. I'm joined today by Ali Hanyaloglu, and welcome, Ali.
Great. Thank you for having me. It's great to be here. And yeah, good first try on my last name
Hey, it's I had to practice a bit there.
there.
Before we get into the questions, and I got a lot of things that I'm really curious about from an AI for retail perspective, but could you tell us a little bit about yourself and your role at Amplience?
Yeah, for sure. So I've been at Amplience now for just over a year as we do this, and I lead the product marketing team at Amplience. So the role of myself and my team is that we essentially bring the story of Amplience's products and solutions to life in the market. As we release new products and new capabilities, we make sure that how we are talking about them in the market is relevant, actionable, and measurable for the customers that we speak to.
Great, thanks. So just to get started, why don't we start out with a bit of an overview of the types of use cases that you see for generative AI in retail, just to give us a bit of a backdrop.
Yeah, for sure. So I think when it comes to generative AI in retail, right away, what comes to mind is just content generation, right? That's going to be the immediate, obvious one that we will think about. But there are actually other areas too where Gen AI will be able to help out. There'll be things that are considered maybe more mundane tasks that need to happen around the content that we're generating. Making sure it's SEO friendly, for example, is
Mhm.
something that can really help out there. Making sure it's accessible to those who have visual and motion disabilities and but yet still need to interact with that content. And then in just ensuring things like governance is put in place. And that's everything from ensuring that the content follows a brand tone of voice to following with local regulations as well. That will be true, not just for text based content, but more and more so for images and even video and 3D in the near future as well.
Great. So that actually leads me into something that I've heard a little about and I'm curious about. And obviously marketing content, there's an opportunity there for dynamic creation, but the place where I thought this is really interesting is in the product description, and maybe even you mentioned images, so also maybe in the images. How is generative AI? How can you use it there to make the shopping experience more personal?
Yeah, or should we say more relevant, right?
More
Or
relevant,
compelling,
yeah,
more
I like
compelling
that,
as well.
yeah.
Even though technologies have been around to help with respect to content really pertaining to the products, everything from the name to the description to washing instructions and so on and so forth. There's still work that needs to be done there. There are still gaps. I look at brand and retail product description pages out there, and frankly, many of them still leave a lot to be left to be desired. I'm seeing things like just very short descriptions that really don't tell me much. I'm seeing things like
Mm,
product codes or internal tracking codes slipping through into content.
mm,
But the reality is that if you look at things from a buyer's perspective and the actual shopping experience, we are influenced more and more by that product actually telling me a story about itself.
mm.
And that's everything from how a brand values part of the product that I am buying. What will my experience actually be with the product from the moment I click add to cart to buy to get it in my hands to actually using it? Is it being written in a way that is not just relevant to me, but also reflects, my personality and what I'm looking for? These aspects today, I think, I still need to be worked on a lot more, but they're really hard to do, especially as
Mm.
product catalogs get bigger, but also as the amount of competition out there grows as well. And so I feel like that's something whereby technologies like Gen AI can help bring the story of that product to life when we get to that product
Mhm.
description page, and looking at things like product descriptions and what have you. That also means the images too, that are associated with that. Too many times, we'll just see one image of a product on a white background, right? We'll see a lot of that, and that may be fine. That may be okay. But in many cases, I need to be able to see that product in context. So backgrounds for that image, setting that it's in, how it's being used, 3D interactions. And today, to be able to create all of those is a lengthy and expensive process.
Mhm.
You and I are photographers on the side. We would love to be able to have those opportunities to shoot a
Mhm.
product in every single situation that's possible.
Absolutely.
Sign me up for
Talk
that.
about money. That's money.
But the reality is that that's probably not going to happen, or it hasn't been able to be possible today. But I'm here in New England, in the States. Apparently, it's snowing outside right now. I didn't see that myself earlier. But if I want to buy a product, show it to me in my context. If you show me a product on a beach in Miami with palm trees, they're, beautiful, lovely, not relevant to me, unfortunately. These are all aspects of the product description, the product information that will benefit from Gen AI that goes beyond just simple title, SKU, and short description.
I mean, it seems to me too that there's a lot of behavioral data that you have. As an online shopper, I leave breadcrumbs all over the place, right? I mean, even simple things like, oh, I keep clicking on the blue sweaters instead of the black ones or whatever, right? I mean, so it seems like that could really be an opportunity there for some dynamic personalization that really does almost get to individualization.
Yeah, that's true. So I see two aspects of that. One is if we look just purely at personalization as we've known it today, and which has been around for a long time and started off with simple rules and now is using machine learning and deep learning and other techniques. But that's a case of a technology identifying who I am, putting me in a
Mhm.
box essentially, and then matching that box to certain types of content. Now, there's lots of challenges with that, which would probably be another episode for you, Michael, in terms of that particular topic.
Mm,
But it's been a struggle for many brands and retailers today because the ability to get enough relevant data about your customers is getting harder and harder to do,
mhm.
especially as we are interacting with brands and retailers through a mobile device more and more.
Sure.
And secondly, there hasn't been enough content to be able to deliver that level of personalization.
Right.
And so they tend to struggle, and you tend to put into more general buckets. That's one area that can be addressed for
Mhm.
sure, making sure that there is enough content for personalization engines or insight engines, as they're sometimes
Mhm.
called, to be able to not just make a decision about who we are, but have enough content to pull from that is relevant at that particular moment in time.
Mhm.
But there's another angle to this, and why Gen AI is going to come in, which is we are being influenced by contextual factors more than ever in the decisions that we make when we buy products, both as
Mhm.
individual consumers, but at a business level as well. Those contextual factors, in some cases, are known: availability, inventory, the product catalog information that we just talked about, things like that. But then
Mhm.
there are more and more unpredictable and unknown contextual factors that are influencing decisions. Things like a cargo ship getting stuck in the Suez Canal, as happened last year. No one saw that coming, especially not the brands who had products on that cargo ship and every other cargo ship that was stuck behind it. Now, all of a sudden, they have to respond and react to that. And as a buyer or shopper, if I'm going to a website and I just see unavailable, that's frustrating. If I go in and think it's available, but then I find out all they've got is extra small for that particular product, equally frustrating. Email to be notified. What does that mean? So today, in order to stand out, brands and retailers actually need to generate content that reflects that particular contextual factor. And it goes on from there, whether social media happenings, movies that are going on, and responding to that. It's not necessarily personalized. It just needs to happen very quickly from a content perspective.
I think that's really interesting because from the standpoint of of your ability to build that customer experience, you're really looking at there's a lot of little frustrations that create friction barriers, right? And I that one happens to me a lot. The leave me an email to be on the waiting list. Like I don't want your product that much. Like I might have wanted it that much before I saw that, but I mean that's like it is very frustrating. So if you could actually generate enough of a story that makes me understand why that is. I mean, like you said, that's a great example of, oh, it's stuck in the Suez Canal and they won't be here for another month. I mean,
Yeah,
okay, I would accept that. That's not an unreasonable explanation.
exactly,
Um,
exactly.
so I think that's a great example. So do you have any other examples of how generative AI really is being used in this level of personalization?
In terms of personalization, I think another area that's going to be applied is actually more in terms of things like recommendations as well. So today we have technologies that are around product recommendations. I'm searching for something and it says, hey, here's what we think you wanted based on what you entered here, and here are some related things. Or I'm on a product description page for a particular product. Here are the things we recommend that are related to that.
Mm,
The intent there is basically to grow the average car value, right, and essentially
right.
get a higher revenue from a customer, which is great. The thing is that a lot of those recommendations are working fine, but the way that we do that is typically through search.
Mm,
And search, we've been trained as human beings to search everywhere like we do on Google, which is we just throw in a few words.
right.
And where Gen AI gets really interesting when it comes to personalization recommendations is when we are actually start having a conversation with the technology.
Mm,
And it goes from red shoes this size to I'm going to a company event and I would like to be able to wear something that is appropriate for this particular venue.
mm,
That would be something that I may type in and say.
mm,
And so that's where things get really interesting because now what's happening is we aren't just giving you a list of related products that either through rules or AI have been given to you. We
right.
may actually be including content, different assets based on that particular recommendation. So the product recommendation may be the same, but maybe the background for that particular product is different.
Mm,
Maybe as well as giving me a product recommendation, it's also got some other articles about how to best use that product, where to use it, and so on.
mm,
Well, I think from that perspective, recommendations that are personalized to what I'm trying to do, the amount of information that I'm actually going to present it is not only going to grow, but actually be even more relevant to what I'm trying to
yeah.
do.
I mean, that really does change the experience with recommendation engines if you can start to have that dialogue. I've been using a lot of different generative AI tools for the last year, and I know a lot of people are. And for me, part of that was just education, right? So I could learn how to talk about it.
Sure.
But one of the things that I've noticed is that 9 times out of 10, when I would have gone to Google, I don't anymore. I go to one of these other tools because even though I can search Google and I'm pretty good at it, I mean, I've been doing it for a very long time. I, it's just not the same experience. I get a much better response by going into that generative AI tool, whichever one I might choose, and being able to provide a lot more context that, in fact, would make the Google search not work. Right. It
Exactly.
would actually mislead the Google search, but in the context of a GPT, interaction, it does help. So it sounds like what you're saying there is that the recommendation engine really does transform from what it used to be in the kind of traditional rules-based world to something that's quite different and is much more conversational and interactive.
Correct. And I think the other thing that's going to happen with all of those different tools is that they will need
Mm,
to be able to have context and understanding of the industry or category or vertical that they are part of as well.
mm,
Um, So that's going to be something else that's going to be absolutely key for this kind of technology to actually be successful.
Mm.
They're taking a generic approach to things, irrespective of what industry you're in. We're going to have the same problems that we had before with personalization, which is, like you said, with this, there's going to be context that will be just completely missed, and there'll be wrong answers given.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the this move away from context, adding context versus this kind of segmentation that we used to do that puts individuals in very large groups, and it's really difficult to narrow that down more. But the more you can narrow that down, the more relevant it is to me, the more likely I am to be engaged with your brand and
Exactly.
continue to do that, right? Yeah, that
Exactly.
makes a lot
Yeah.
of sense.
Yes.
Um, so I'm also curious about maybe some of the other back end pieces of the use of generative AI in retail and e-commerce. Like it seems to me that perhaps it could be applied to things like demand forecasting or ways to change the traditional way of forecasting demand, perhaps to be more accurate. Is that something that you guys have looked at, or something that you're seeing?
In talking with others, I am starting to see, like you said, the question being asked of how do we bring Gen AI into the back office, as
Mm,
it were. Demand forecasting is an interesting one. Demand forecasting has already been using AI for a while,
right.
but it's been typically using machine learning in order to better predict
Right.
certain outcomes. So you need to be able to give it a certain outcome, and in many cases, it needs historical data in order to
Yeah.
work. Somebody who I used to work with, who was definitely a technical leader in the AI space, used to say something around the lines of, AI is really good at telling you what's happened. It's actually not very good at telling you what's going to come. And what it's really doing is just making a best guess based on the data that it's got.
Right.
It's a mathematical best guess. I won't debate that. They were far more technical than me, but I
Mm,
can understand that because it's based on historical data, and that's why a lot of those technologies had what they call a cold start problem, which is they had
right.
to ramp up to get enough data in order to make predictions that were more accurate overall.
Mm.
What
A
Gen
lot.
AI is sorry, what
I
Gen
was
AI is
just
going
going
to
to.
do?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I was just going to say a lot of variables that actually have to be dealt with
Yes,
there if you're in that old sort of historical view. Yeah, that
yes,
actually makes a lot of
exactly.
sense.
Exactly. There are a lot of, and that's where some of the Gen AI technology I think is going to make things
Mm,
much more interesting. First of all, with just the way that LLMs work, being based on vectors and graphs and so on,
right.
you're actually going to have more and more data points and be able to make relationships and connections to them
Mm,
as well, which will help with the ability for um, demand or just any general forecasting technology to be able to give better results faster and with a greater data set.
mm,
It's also going to open up the ability for users to be able to interact with these demand
mm,
forecasting engines in new ways. So, doing things like taking into account those contextual factors I talked about.
mm,
And then being able to, rather than having to be a data science wizard, to be able to do this, is actually ask questions
mm,
through natural prompts, natural language prompts, to be able to get answers that demand forecasting can help with.
mm.
That will go beyond
Interesting.
just optimization against metrics.
Yeah. So once again, the application of the Gen AI tool also helps in that just in the user experience from the tool perspective or the UI perspective, right? It makes it conversational and more natural, which means that I don't have to have that level of data science available at that point in the process. Certainly, it's used earlier in the process, I'm
Absolutely.
sure, to build the tool. But once you're to that point, you're actually having a conversation with the tool, and I'm seeing that in some other industry applications and other just applications of Gen AI, and so that makes sense that it could really um, almost democratize the capability to do that demand
Yes.
forecasting across a broader set of users.
Exactly. If Gen AI as a technology is doing one thing. It's exactly that. It is democratizing the availability of AI and what we can do in our skill sets in as
Mm.
individuals.
Mm.
That's the part that's really exciting to me is that democratization.
Yeah, I agree that that certainly stands out almost every time I take a look at use cases. So we were kind of looking behind the scenes a bit for demand. So that kind of makes me think of another part of the problem, or something that we've talked about a lot over the last 4 years of almost a pandemic life, and that's the supply chain and the inventory. And we hinted a little bit at that earlier when we were talking about availability, that sort of thing. But is there a role for generative AI in that whole supply chain optimization area, inventory management and supply chain optimization?
I believe that there will be. Some of it you could say is like we talked about before, which is supply chain should be influencing the experience that we have,
Mm,
so that it is continuously positive, or as positive as can be.
sure.
That way, a customer is more likely to want to stay, to buy more, to come back, and so on.
Mm,
So I think what's going to happen is that they have their specialties, but there's going to be a greater coupling between these as well,
sure.
for sure. Um, and then supply chain can then just actually start to become almost a means to be able to make recommendations to those who are managing and in charge of the
Mm,
experience as well.
mm,
Um, and so being able to react quick enough to what is happening, if supply chain is seeing challenges with respect to, I
mm,
don't know, let's say a product is being returned heavily.
mm,
So, at that particular end of things as well. How do you handle that? Not just in terms of dealing with the returns and the inventory from a process
right.
perspective, but then also ensuring that the content that you provide is maybe there's a gap in there that needs to be addressed quickly that would then
Mm,
minimize the returns. You see where I'm
hmm.
going with
Yeah,
that?
so like the instructions are wrong. I mean, that's kind of blunt and simple, but I mean maybe I'm just not, I don't know how to do whatever it is I wanted the thing to do, and that's why it's being returned. Wow, that's
Yes.
that's actually really interesting. Hmm. Yeah, I mean, and that obviously goes into support as well, and maybe even to back into product, because you're talking about also being able to identify flaws or weaknesses or whatever that might be
Exactly,
depending on the product.
exactly.
Wow.
So feeding into PLM, feeding into
Mhm.
customer support and the knowledge base that goes on there, feeding into what happens on the e-commerce site and on the website and mobile devices. You
Mm,
start to see how these things start to talk to each other through the medium of Gen AI.
right. I mean, it really does. And this, I don't know that I've certainly talked a lot about experience and customer experience in other contexts with Gen AI, but I'm not sure until now that this sort of crystallized that idea that in fact what this creates is the capability to communicate in a more natural, effective way with your customer, by providing them more of that backstory, context, narrative, whatever the right words are, depending on what it is, I guess. And that's something that's very different, I think, than what most online experiences are today.
Think about a great experience that you've had in store with a human being.
Hmm.
There's probably lots of great examples you and your listeners will have.
Sure.
And I asked the question, what if we could bring that great experience into a digital world as well? So, I think about, I want to buy a suit, let's say. I go to a local store because obviously I want something I have to try out.
Mm,
And I find one, I'm like, I really like this jacket, but I can't find it in my size.
mm,
You go to the rep who's there, the rep that says, no, sorry, we don't have it. Everything we got is on the show floor. He'll probably be like, all right, thanks, bye. You're out the door.
right.
The rep that
Right.
says, you know what, let me just check. They go and
Hmm.
check and they're like, actually, you know what? Our sister store, just a 15-minute drive away,
Yeah.
has the size you want. If you want, I'll call them right now. I'll put it on hold for you. You can head over. It's yours. Or
Yeah.
they'll be like, you know what? We don't actually have that size, but here we do it in this one in your size. And as you can see, it's only different in this little way. And it's
Mm,
actually $10 cheaper. I'm just making this up, of course.
Yeah, no, but I
These
mean,
are
but
all
that's
great experiences,
exactly,
right? That
yeah,
we took for
yeah.
granted. We haven't seen those in the digital world yet, really.
Mm-mm, mm-mm.
And that's where I think this is going to be able to be enabled. Brands and
Yeah,
retailers need to have enough content so that the decision making engines can actually pull those recommendations as necessary. So, and that's everything, not again, like I said before, not just from product recommendations, but from the perspective of, oh, that's how I have to take care of my suit. It's not really what I was
mhm.
looking for. Can I have something else? That's content.
Yeah,
That's
yeah,
that's
it
associated
is.
with. So I see that's what ultimately the ones who are going to win with Gen AI are the ones who are going to be able to leverage it to be able to provide that kind of shopping experience that we're
Mm.
all looking to achieve.
Yeah, in some ways, I mean, this reminds me of my days at G2, building out, the review site, and how we, wanted to help software buyers learn more, because that was really the benefit, and that's what we learned from the buyers, is they would go through and pour over those reviews in detail, because they wanted to figure out, is this really going to be a good fit for me, beyond the marketing material,
Hmm.
but tell me the rest of it. And that data, and now actually G2 has a bot that sits there that will interact with you in a natural way to help you get to that data. I mean, it's almost the same thing here, that you now have this way to naturally interact with your store, and an experience that is easier to tailor and to be natural, like you would if you were just standing in a store talking to somebody. And that's something we could never do online before.
We haven't been able to. We could, but we could never do it quickly enough, and we never had
Right.
enough content and assets and
Yeah.
information and data to be able to execute on it.
Mm.
That's been the challenge. We need to be able to do this quickly, and we need to be able to do it at volume as well,
And dynamically, right? So it has to
and
be able to
dynamically.
scale, and it's dynamic. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's the real twist there, is how can I make this respond to an interaction in real time?
exactly,
That's not easy.
exactly.
Yeah.
No, it's not easy. And even today, with the current
Mm,
Gen AI technologies that we've got, it's actually really hard to do it in real time.
mm,
It's really not possible now because there is processing that is happening. But I'm hearing every week about how AI is going to shift to the endpoint. And we already have neural processing units and other dedicated AI chips and functionality in our mobile phones. Never
mhm,
mind a high-end laptop. Once once the smart, intelligent engineers out there figure out how to leverage that endpoint processing to be able to deliver on that
mhm.
dynamic experience, that's when things will start moving to being in real time.
Hmm. That's really interesting. I mean,
Stay tuned on
even
that
just
one.
yeah, well, no, I mean, even just in using it on my phone. I mean, I do that much more, now, because I can use tools like ChatGPT and Perplexity and others on the phone in a much more natural way than
Yep,
I would have been able to. And honestly, it can provide an assistant that is really an assistant, not this kind of rules based thing that we've seen in the past. Yeah.
exactly, exactly. Yep.
So that sort of leads me to the other end of the customer journey then, and I'm curious about here, and obviously, we've done some research and I've had some good conversations around using Gen AI and support in general, but I'm just thinking, how do you see this applying to the customer service piece in the online e-commerce world?
To the customer service piece for e-commerce, that's a really interesting question. This is chat's been around for a while.
Yeah.
We know that it's been in the past primarily rules based.
Mm,
So if you've ever had to implement rules for a chat based system on your website, I
yeah.
sympathize with you because I know it's
Mhm.
not easy. And essentially, as the amount of content grows, as well as the types of questions, you need to factor that in.
Mhm.
So AI has been used to help identify answers that can be as relevant as possible to the question that's being posed. But to our previous point, much like search, there are still things that happen like false positives or I'm sorry, I don't understand your question and things like that that happen. Um, which is why, we often hear people say, can I just talk to a human being, please? Because the feeling is if I talk to a human, then I'm going to get to my answer.
Right.
And then that way I can also elaborate or not as much as I
Mhm.
want to with
Yeah.
the question or challenge that I've got. I think Gen AI is going to revolutionize that particular space, both from a customer perspective,
Mhm.
in terms of now I don't have to be rigidly set with a preset defined set of answers or use a very,
Mhm.
search like I'm just going to give a few words, whereas I can now have a conversation.
Yeah.
I believe also it's going to help the human beings behind that as well.
Yeah.
What they will be able to do is they're going to be facing a larger and diverse set of questions from their customers. And for those of you who've been in the customer service space, in many cases, the answer doesn't exist. And so they will have some kind of process to be able to kick off
Right.
either generating an article for a knowledge base based on that a question that can't be answered yet, or
Mhm.
diverting to a community forum and looking for peer to peer help.
Mhm.
I actually see Gen AI helping customer service reps
Yep.
based on their diagnostics actually come up with content at that moment it's being
Yeah.
asked for.
Yep.
And that way, not only will they get an answer that will help that customer at the moment in time, but it will help their peers and their future customers
Yeah.
as well because they've got an answer they just generated rather than waiting.
Yeah,
So I see that as very
I've looked at a couple of CRM systems recently that are doing exactly that, right? It's
yep,
the assistant for the service. So it actually takes the chatbot behind the scenes and gives the chatbot assistance to the agent as well as, having it up front to handle certain simple things. So
exactly.
that's powerful, and this idea of intelligent chatbots, I think, is really exciting because certainly none of us have enjoyed interacting with not intelligent chatbots in the past.
Exactly. And it goes beyond that because customer service is typically seen as a silo
Mm,
from the rest of the e-commerce experience.
yeah,
And from a customer perspective, it's all the same thing.
yeah,
So I question brands and retailers. I ask them like, do you have content that is both applicable to the e-commerce
mhm,
experience as well as the customer service experience?
yeah,
Because you should be leveraging them for both. Because if they look and feel different, your customer does not have a good experience. They're going to feel like they're
yeah,
talking to two different companies.
yeah,
And so there is an opportunity there to generate and have enough content that can be atomized in a way that it can be leveraged easily across
mhm,
every touch point that a customer has with you. Because
sure,
at the end of the day, it's one experience.
yeah. Yeah, and that's been one of the biggest challenges. And survey after survey, I get that feedback from customers saying that it feels a completely different experience on one end of the journey than it is on the other, and that's a quick way to tarnish a brand or lose a customer,
Absolutely.
frankly. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah, it makes sense. Well, so we're running out of time, and I could definitely keep going, and I'm sure we had a lot more interesting things we could talk about, but I suspect that at some point the listeners are going to start to drop off to sleep or something. So why don't we get my last bit, because there's one thing that I like to ask every guest, and I feel like I get feedback from the listeners a lot of times that they say they really appreciate this. But could you recommend someone, a thought leader, an author, a mentor, somebody who's influenced your career and you think would be relevant for the audience?
I'm going to give two, if I may. One that started early in my
Absolutely.
career, and one more recently. So my entrepreneurial hero is Sir Richard Branson.
Mhm.
There's a couple of things that he's famous for that really stuck with me, which is he is the one who's attributed to saying, "If you're the smartest person in the room, you're in the wrong room,"
Yeah.
and that's something that's always stuck with me.
Yeah.
And then, secondly, the other thing he's talked about a lot is he says that there's a saying that says that the customer comes first, and he will say, "No, they don't. The employee comes first.
Yeah.
Take care of your employees, and they will take care of your customers for you."
Yep.
And so that's something that's also stuck with me in my career.
Mm.
But more recently, somebody's had a sort of a profound effect on me. is Jeff Hawkins. He authored a book called A Thousand Brains
Hmm.
that I highly recommend reading. It really changed me recently in terms of how I look at the world around me.
Mm.
It's a theory of intelligence in the human brain, and it starts off with that new theory about what does intelligence mean and how does it biologically work with humans. But then he maps that to artificial intelligence as well,
Mm.
and why it's actually that's what I say. AI is actually not very intelligent, but then also looking to a future where human intelligence and artificial intelligence will come together and we'll be better off as a result.
Mm.
Fantastic book. I
Yeah.
highly recommend it. It makes me think about what I say and do as a human being. It's that profound.
Wow. I mean, that a great recommendation. I really appreciate that, and that's definitely going on my my reading list because I think that sounds like something that's extremely appropriate for where we are these days, right?
Absolutely.
Great. Well, Ali, I really appreciate you joining today. Really interesting conversation. So, thank you very much.
Oh, it's great to be here. It's great to talk to you, Michael. Thanks a lot.
And that's the show for this week. Thank you all for joining. Remember to hit that subscribe button. And for more on AI and other software research reports and posts, check out the arionresearch.com/blog and /research reports. And don't forget to join us next week. I'm Michael Fawcett, and this is the Disambiguation Podcast.